We welcome you in the Sam and Cole podcast. No longer international. Sam is a man of many coasts. And returning from the first ever victory for the Jaguars in London and the second victory of the season in a come from ahead, come from behind fashion. Sam, I don't know really where to start with this game other than the big picture, which is, boy, this takes some heat off Gus Bradley for the time being, and you always like to win heading into the bye week.
We'll start by thanking Champion Cycling, obviously, for their continued support at Arlington, the beach, and Mandarin. Stop by and see Phil or Jim in Arlington or Brian out at the beach. And they'll take care of your cycling needs, from road bikes to beach cruisers. Champion Cycling is the place to go. And you're right, Cole. I'm not exactly sure where to start. Our colleague Dan Hicken and I sit next to each other a lot, and we did at this game. And when Buffalo took the lead, we both looked at each other and said, "What are we going to say about this?" Because it was a complete collapse, a total collapse. Even though I tried to get Gus to talk about that after the game, he wouldn't. I will say that Buffalo made the adjustment necessary in the second half. Buffalo's not as bad as they appeared to be in the first half. Jaguars clearly aren't as good. The teams are a little better matched than that. But as I wrote and said yesterday, the first step in learning how to win and not how to lose is beat teams you're supposed to beat. And with the depletion of talent that Buffalo had at quarterback, and Sammy Watkins not playing, and some of the other guys, the Jaguars, in the eye test, were the better team yesterday. Should have won the game. Agreed. And ended up winning it. How they won it, in the end, we talk a lot about how they lose it, and so I think you got to talk the same way about how they won it, even though Buffalo was back in the game. And a confluence of events and a change in offensive philosophy for Buffalo in the second half really put the Jaguars back up against the wall. And I don't understand why Bob Babich and Gus Bradley, the two defensive gurus, saw that, basically, without getting too technical, in the first half, Buffalo was running a lot of three wides with not as much protection, and asking Manuel to take a 5 to 7 step drop and find the open guy. In the second half, they were running a 2 wide with a tight end and asking him to take like a 3-step drop and get the ball out of his hands. And when a team does that, Tom Brady threw the ball 50 sometimes yesterday in that victory. And I think the Patriots might have only run it five times or something ridiculous like that.
A lot of those passes are as good as a run.
Right, and that's what Buffalo's philosophy was. How you adjust to that on defense, I think, is where Bradley and Babich are going to have to figure out, because clearly that's what bothers the Jaguars, is the ball that's out of the quarterback's hand in 2.8 seconds, and a receiver running a crossing route starts by getting 2 or 3 yards, and for the Jaguars, it turns in many times to 10 or 12 yards.
Well, I could tell you the simple answer to this, Sam.
Yeah, put pressure on the quarterback?
Well, no, but when they're getting rid of that quickly, you're not going to get pressure when they're going 3-step drop.
Yeah, right.
You do cover better. And
cover better.
For this is why I'm just, again, Gus Bradley's energy and positivity are great, but I'm just not sure about what's happening sometimes on the defense when, if your thought is we're going to rush 4 and try to get pressure. Well, you're not getting pressure, so you got to change it up, which they did a bit yesterday. Well, so when Buffalo makes the adjustment, don't give them so much space behind. Cover.
What we're learning is that Dwayne Gratz is no better than Devon House, who's really no better than Sergio Brown or Jonathan Cyprian. The only guy who looks like he can cover like that is Aaron Colvin. And maybe what we've learned in this short period of time with Gus Bradley is that he was able to run that defense in Seattle because he had Cam Chancellor and Richard Sherman. And if you've got 2 guys in those positions, the safety and that cover corner position, then you're able to do a lot of other things with the 9 other guys. But I don't know that any other team has that. And I mean, there were so many times. I mean, I don't know what Gratz and Cyprian were doing on that touchdown throw. They both ran up and stopped, and the guy just kept running, caught the ball, and ran for a touchdown. I mean,
do you think now, based on where we are, that if you know, again, knowing that Dante Fowler is going to be back now, we don't know if he's all the way back or how he is, but assuming that Dante Fowler's back, right now, do the Jaguars need pass rush or cover better? To me, it's coverage. They need an elite player at that position.
It wouldn't surprise me if they go for some big defensive lineman. They're going to probably have clearly a pick in the top 10 and maybe a pick in the top 5 again. A big defensive lineman, and then in the second round, look for that guy who is developing. I'm not sure Jonathan Cyprian's going to make it. You know, he's not fast, and he continues to make the same kinds of mistakes. And as good a guy as he is, and as hard as he tries, and as earnest as he is, it's hard not to root for him to and maybe overlook some of his flaws. But in the NFL, you can't do that. You know, the guy can either play or he can't. And clearly, other teams see that, and that's where they're taking advantage of it. Can't run with a tight end.
And we
as a safety, you got to be able to run with the tight end.
And we can break down players here, and we'll have plenty of time for that, certainly. But all this talk, we're talking about here, leads me right into what was sort of an overriding feeling and sense that I had of things yesterday. And I talked to several Jaguars fans who live here in town who I know, and that sounded like it'd be shocking that there'd be Jaguars fans here in town. That's not but I talked to them face to face after the game, and in both cases, in talking to these two guys, they both had the same feeling, which was, it almost feels like a loss, even though it was a win. And for a team that had only one win all season, you shouldn't feel so badly about a win. But it didn't feel like, things have been solved now. It more felt like, more things have been exposed, but they got away with it.
How did they feel, I wonder, midway through the second quarter?
Probably.
Right. And to me, that's the question. Where were your feelings midway through the second quarter? Because the Jaguars were taking advantage of a backup quarterback like they're supposed to. E.J. Manuel really looks the part, by the way. And I don't know if he's just never kind of grasped the nuance of the game or some of the things, but literally he threw the ball right to Telvin Smith. He never saw him. He threw him right to him. There was a flash in my mind. What's that?
In fairness, Telvin was wide open.
Nobody was covered. That's right. There was a flash in my mind that we were on offense. It was such a good throw to a wide open guy. So, and they love TJ Yeldon.
And they should. They don't love him enough, by the way.
Right. Well, and where they're deficient, and that we've seen, is on the offensive line has figured out how to pass block. Okay, not great, but they figured out how to pass block as a unit. They have not figured out how to run block, because in those four times at the goal line, not one instance did they win the point of attack. And then the two others later in the game that were also a second and short and a third and short, which really, come on, guys, you're going to call a timeout and you're going to give it to Tyson Alualu? That's your play?
Let me ask you, I think it's a bigger point than just the offensive line. The offensive line is a big part of it. There's no doubt. But also, does Adrian Peterson get pulled out at the goal line and on short yard?
I agree with you. And I said to Gus after the game, I asked him that very specific question. In that package with Tyson, is Toby the only option at tailback? I think that's a legitimate question, don't you?
Absolutely.
Right? And he said no, but that's the play that we practiced this week, and that's what we drew up. To me, that showed that they weren't flexible enough to understand. Yeldon is the guy. If you don't score on first or second down with Gerhardt and you're running power, you got to put Yeldon in the game and let him use some of his skill to try to get in the end zone.
He's got much better vision than Gerhardt, anybody else.
What's the matter with Julius Thomas too? I mean, they threw it to him in the end zone there and got the interference call, but then basically, I mean, those short yardage situations, that red zone, he's the guy. That's why you're paying that guy.
I agree with that. I think generally the offense has been better than the defense this year. I don't think that's too bold of a statement. I think it's been better coached. I think they've got guys who are improving more and getting to taking the next step in their careers more. But they're fortunate that they didn't that didn't cost them the win in London. Let me step away now for a moment because the Jaguars are here at their bye, and the story of the season is yet to be told, and will be decided in the second half of the year in terms of coach moving forward, strengths and weaknesses. Believe it or not, they're actually still within shouting distance of the top of the very bad division.
Right. And by the way, let me ask you, if you were going to hazard a guess at what fans think about Gus Bradley staying or leaving, what would you say the overriding thought would be?
Gone. I would say it's 60-40, time to change coaches.
Okay. Tomorrow, I'm privy to a poll that was commissioned here in town by a political consultant who was asked to do this. And on Tuesday, I'm hoping that we get the actual results and I get a chance to talk to the pollster. Margin of error plus or four. 46% of people identify themselves as either season ticket holders or serious Jaguar fans of a sample of about 700 people said keep Gus Bradley. Only 26% said get rid of him.
That's
clearly Shad Khan is also doing that kind of research somewhere, because when I talked to him on Saturday, he is literally he's going to look at these guys at the end of the year. But I think that's even a smokescreen in itself, unless they get blown out for 10 straight games or whatever. These guys are intact for 2016.
And that was Jeff Darlington's article that said maybe even 2017, unless there's a player revolt.
Who's that?
He's a writer for NFL.com.
Is he? Okay.
So, it's when you see, and let me just kind of put this into some perspective. When you see a story written about what an owner is saying or what an owner is thinking behind closed doors on NFL.com, typically that comes from somebody in the organization wanting that story to get out and wanting it to be known, but they don't want to leak it anywhere local because they want it to be a big, big, and it's suddenly a PR guy going, "Hey, where's our guy? Okay, I got a contact here. Let me call him. Hey, just want to let you know what's going on right now. You can't quote me, but here's what's happening." You know what I mean? That's usually where those things come from, and I suspect if you dig down to it, that's where you probably find something coming from somebody close to Shad Khan in a PR role, kind of shepherding that story. Jaguars in London, though, is one topic I do want to cover here. They went out on Thursday this week, so they spent less time. Everybody spent less time out there. What is the response right now? Jaguars in London from the London sports fan. You were there. What's the feel?
Probably 5 times as many Jaguar jerseys around than there were 2 years ago, and twice as many as last year. And now that they've won a game, I think it'll grow exponentially. And I mean, these people are real Jaguar fans. I mean, they follow the team. They know as much about the team as anybody who lives here. Either they have come here for a game or they are planning to come here for a game. And they're not interested. And here's the other thing here's the shift this year, Cole, and how the dynamic has changed. The thought process now, both in the NFL and among fans in Europe, is not to have their own team. But by as early as next year, there may be 8 or 10, including the preseason games played in Europe. 4 in London, a couple in 2 in Mexico City. Barcelona is a possibility. The games in Germany are already being talked about. So I think there's a thought that London, having London have a team is not going to happen as their own team. So every fan I talked to who was from not from America, said to me, when they committed to us, I committed to them. I have always been an NFL fan, but when they committed to us, and every one of them mentioned the 5-year extension, that couldn't have been more ecstatic. So you know, well,
that makes sense, doesn't it? If you flip it
absolutely.
around, say if an EPL team was going to come to Jacksonville and play every year, and there was no specific connection, but all of a sudden Stoke City decided they're coming to Jacksonville every year to play, there would be a sudden, okay, well, now I get to see a team. If I'm going to pick a team, if I don't have a reason to pick somebody, I'm going to, even if maybe I've been a Chelsea fan or you know, casual Arsenal fan, whatever before, all right, now I'm a Stoke City fan. I mean, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, well, if you're a Chelsea fan now, maybe you're becoming a Stoke City fan this year. But it is it's absolutely fascinating to see that thing grow and to see the connection that people have. People who live in Chelsea in London are walking down the street, Regent Street, on Saturday going, Duval. It's like, what?
I can. By the way, I was about to ask what it sounds like when an Englishman says Duval. I can.
A lot of it's Duval, actually. Yeah.
I'm recording this from the Armada office. I can go grab. We've got some English folks here in the grab me here from them. But so this thought, and again, I've been saying this for I don't know how long. A permanent team in London is a completely ridiculous concept for the NFL. Unless you have an entire division overseas.
And Shad said the NFL's appetite for that has been diminished. And that's why they're expanding to these other things. Yeah.
Right. So from the Jaguars' perspective, they make more money when they do these games. They're still talking about whether they would do a home game and a road game.
Which, by the way, is being discussed right now. Because in 2016 they're gonna play 4 games in London, and one of the teams that goes over as the host is going to stay and play as the visitor the next week. The most likely candidate is the Jaguars. Interestingly, as well, as the home team at Wembley, you know, the Jaguars, just like every other game, get 60% of the revenue. The visiting team gets 40%. Wembley holds almost 90,000. In 2018, the NFL is going to play 2 games over at Tottenham's new place, which holds 60,000. Difference in revenue there. Next year, because of the commitments at Wembley already, they're looking at playing a game called Twickenham Park,
where they play. They just played the rugby.
Exactly. It's a rugby pitch, so that's one of the places that they're looking to play a game next year. So it's possible. I mean, and it's possible the Jaguars will be the visiting team. Shad said that he's no longer interested in playing anywhere else but London, that the connection there is so strong that even though at one point you were there 2 years ago when he's talked about Western Europe and being the Europe's team, he thinks the connection in London is so strong. He does not have any interest in playing in Germany or Barcelona or Mexico City. He likes the London game. And so I said, well, what about 2 games there? One as the visitor, and he said, well, we're having conversations about that. It's not something. It's something we'd probably be interested in. I think it'd be more interested if they were winning, right?
He doesn't want to play at Tottenham either, does he?
No, he's not going to play at Tottenham. Yeah. And in fact, part of the Jaguar deal to play in London is to be the home team at Wembley.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
and part of that's a revenue deal.
Yeah, and I also think playing at Tottenham, there may be a little, you know, owner
second class.
So
absolutely. And Shad, we know Shad well enough now. He only does things the best way you can do them. And if that's the national stadium and it's the second largest stadium in all of Europe, which it is, then that's where he wants to play. And that was part of the deal. And that's why the announcement was made last week about how the Jaguars are going to stay at Wembley.
Have you changed your coverage at all, or the questions you're asking, or are you getting different answers when you or different responses from this third year you've been over there and you've spent other time personally in the UK and in London? are people interacting with you differently when you go over there?
They recognize you as American media covering the Jaguars. And even people who aren't wearing Jaguars gear, who are just, the everyday Londoner, recognize why you're there and what you're doing, and they engage you that way. So there's a lot of people in London who think of the Jaguars as their home away from home. So that's kind of interesting. The other thing that I've noticed, Cole, is that there was a lot of blowback the first year when the Jaguars went to play in London to announce that, about taking away a home game, about, oh, he's going to move the team to London, blah, 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 blah. I hear so much less of that. And I hear more of Jaguar fans kind of being proud that they're the NFL's international team, that they're, and then they have a chance to go over there, that they're the team. It's not a complete shift, but I think that, there's a group of people who are, hey, we tailgate 10 times a year. This is what we do. You can't take a game away from us, who think they have ownership of the team, who are never going to buy into anything but that kind of dynamic of what they do. But then there's a whole other group of fans who maybe don't even have a Twitter handle, who are like, they're either have been there or they're planning to go there to a game at some point. And I just talked to so many people over there on Saturday who said, yeah, we're here. And, we really saved up for this trip. And now that they've committed for 5 years, in the next 3 years, we're coming back. They're going to save up and do it again.
Let me finish on this as far as the Jaguars. Going back to your point about the poll, about, what
right.
ticket owners or fans, hardcore fans want. Does it have to be more than 50? Does it have to be a majority before a guy gets fired? I mean, I guess at the end of the season, if it's 25% are anti the coach, that's a big chunk of the fan base that doesn't like the direction. I wonder if there's a quantifiable baseline of, hey, your approval rating has got to be this, or your disapproval rating has to be below this.
Because if 46% of the fans who identify themselves as season ticket holders say, don't get rid of you, well, they're going to buy tickets again. So 25% say that they should get rid of you, and they don't. What percentage of those are not going to buy tickets? I guess.
If it's half, that's still a big chunk of.
That's a big number. You're right. So only Shad can determine that, and that's what he said. He said at the end of the year, whether it's the eye test or wins and losses, but he kept coming back to the same phrase: are we better than we were 2 and 3 years ago? And I think that's where you have to look at it. And he said, in a philosophical note, football, like life, doesn't ascend in a straight line. He said you have your ups and downs, and hopefully your ups outweigh your downs. So if he's thinking that way, they're not going anywhere.
No, if the other thing you wonder about is, was he prepared on a stage that he knew was going to be big to give the vote of confidence without having to give the dreaded vote of confidence? And
I think it's he didn't come into that situation unprepared. He's got his own personal PR guy who follows him around, right? And
Arlington's number, by the way.
Yeah, and who feeds him what these questions probably are going to be. Be prepared for this and this and this, and that's what that guy's job is. And Shad is a very smart person. Clearly does that. I mean, it was a wide-ranging half-hour interview. He didn't duck any questions. He answered straight. He was asked whether he felt like it was, okay that he paid $6 million for Devon House and they benched him. And he said, I think what it shows is that you shouldn't be playing payers just because you're paying players. Mm-hmm. You either do your job or you're not going to be on the field.
Last thought here, we'll wrap things up. Armada, one last match in the year is Sunday after Florida, Georgia. Going to be I think it's going to be a sellout, by the way, for the last match, which is going to be
really wow.
Going to be a cool way to they started with the
what time of day?
4:00 start Sunday.
That's a good start time. Yeah.
That happens, and of course we haven't even touched on Florida, Georgia. Which is so much of a different game now than it looked like it was going to be 3 weeks ago.
The game has changed 3 times.
Yeah.
From the beginning of the year to when Florida developed to what they were, to what you thought at the beginning of the year, Georgia will kill them. Mm-hmm. Then you thought as Florida started to play better and Greer took over as the starter and Georgia and Lambert couldn't get out of his own way, you thought, oh, well, Florida's going to run these guys over. Greer's out of the picture. Lambert really hasn't done anything to make anybody think he's special. Now it's a toss-up. I really think the game's a toss-up.
I think Florida's got the edge after the Nick Chubb injury. I think that really changes things pretty dramatically. And they've got more to play for at this point, seemingly. So we'll see how it all goes. But it's one of these days we're getting undefeated against undefeated in this game. And that's what I always back.
That's right.
At some point, we're getting back to that. All right, that'll do it for the Sam and Cole podcast. Thanks, as always, to the support of Champion Cycling. 3 locations, Sam, Arlington, Mandarin, and the Beach.
Very good. Stop by and see them for any cycling needs. By the way, best service departments, bike service departments. You just want to have your bike tuned up a little bit now that the weather's changed. Stop by and see. I mean, these guys know they ride themselves. That's why it's a great place to go, because you go in there and they don't need to look in a book. They know what's going on. It's a hands-on shop. It's a good spot to be.
I'm about ready to get back on the bike here after the soccer season ends and get tuned up. All right, that'll do it. Thanks so much. You can follow Sam on Twitter at Sam Kavaris. Follow me on Twitter at Cole Pepper. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher, and leave a comment if you like on either one of those. We appreciate the support and the criticism sometimes.
Kind of. Yeah.
Maybe. Thanks so much for listening right here. It's the Sam and Cole podcast.